Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on InRangeTV. Carl and I are here today with Cy and Lauren Hudson, the co-designers and developers and owners of the Hudson 9 pistol. And we're having a little tipple at the end of the evening, and we figured we would take some time to just talk about what are the realities of being in the gun building industry. Because I think there's a lot of stuff that goes on in the background of making a cool new gun like the Hudson H9 that people really just aren't familiar with. I think people have some unrealistic expectations or misconceptions of what goes on.
I think it's one of the neat things we've been able to bring to InRange is talking to some people that have been designing new or innovative or trying to reproduce guns on the market.
Yep.
And the insight we get from talking to folks such as yourself is different and a unique perspective on an industry that otherwise people don't really understand very well. And so I know we spoke to you at SHOT Show a while back, and you had some dates set and some ambitious goals, and as it seems is the case with every firearms development effort, whether it's a reproduction or a new pistol, such as yours, things happen that are unexpected, and this industry isn't what a lot of people fantasize it to be. So maybe we could talk just frankly about the kind of stuff you guys ran into.
Yeah. So
You can start.
Oh, thank you. Let's see. The number of variables. The number of variables that you're dealing with is just amazing. You can have, let's say you are doing an extractor and you have one shop decides to do machine one while you're waiting for a mold to finish, and then all of a sudden you get the mold. You can measure that same piece out of the same theoretical material, but if one was tumbled slightly differently or for a slightly longer period of time, it's going to be smoother and react better within the tolerances of your slide. Mm-hmm. And so that's one part. It's one for instance, and that can stop 2 weeks of production. Mm-hmm. Now that's not what happened. Our delay was a supplier issue. Mm-hmm. But if we're talking about what are the things that can affect that type of thing, diagnosing failure to feed off the line.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so many components that go into it. You have your print for all of your parts, and each part has a tolerance band, and the tolerance band is basically this theoretical space that the part can take up.
Right, plus or minus some number.
Plus or minus some number.
Mm-hmm.
And not only are you dealing with the variable of where that could fall, but also translating something from a prototype to a production environment. You're making more frequently.
Right.
And really dialing in where, a prototype part, you make a few, and you test a few, and in theory, that's where the part is going to fall in that tolerance band. You translate that to production, you're on production tooling, you're making them more frequently, dialing in toolware for machined parts.
Yep.
There's lots of lessons learned, so optimizing along the way.
So just to give people some basis for how to approach this, if you have any random part in the gun, how many actual dimensions are there for just a random part?
We have one that has 495 dimensions.
One part.
One part has 495 dimensions.
And any one of those not being in spec can be a significant problem.
Yeah.
It has to be evaluated. The reason that you have defined it as that, so, through our entire development process, you have to come into what are your critical dimensions. You've got these ones that interface with assemblies or just individual components, and when something is out, you evaluate it for what is the impact on that, and does it being out in one direction matter?
Right.
If the other mating part is on the low end of the tolerance band. It's this whole stacking.
But this is the stacking. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Right. People think of a part as, well, there's a blueprint and it tells you what the dimensions are, and so when you get that part, it's this big in all of these different dimensions, when the reality is every single part is you're going to have like a physical space that is the size of your part plus plus a little bit bigger in every dimension, and a negative one that's a little smaller in every dimension, and every actual piece that comes off of a machine, whether it's you're making it or you're subcontracting it, every piece is going to be random somewhere between these two minimum and maximum spaces. And so you have to identify how that flexible size of the part interacts with every other flexibly sized part and where they have to be so that you don't stack up, well, the biggest possible on this plus this means all of a sudden there's no space and it can't move and it just doesn't work.
Not only that, that's where you get into this thing of stacking tolerances. So let's say, many people may not understand this, but you are not, as a startup company, capable of manufacturing every component in your gun. You have to subcontract with others. And so
Although I would really, really like to someday own a spring machine, because if you ever watch them on YouTube, they just spit them
look
out.
awesome.
It's so cool. It's so cool.
But on a given Wednesday, contractor ABC decides that their machines are a little off, but they don't realize it, and they produce a part that's slightly out of spec. And then you get another part from vendor DEF, and that part's a little out of spec. And those parts have to work together in coordination. And now the tolerances, the stacking tolerances between the plus or minus on this one and the plus or minus on this one, when you have a problem on the line and you bring the gun off and test fire and it doesn't work properly, now you got to figure out which one is it? Is it more than one? Is it only one? Is it four of them working against each other at the same time?
And
Yeah, the more pieces one touches, the more of a
Exactly. And that's where the
Hairball is.
495 numbers or whatever could come from.
And so whenever we first approached this, I mean, you hear all these as theoreticals, and you're like, well, how do I make sure that doesn't happen to me? Okay, so that's the wrong question to ask.
Can't.
Because it's guns.
It happens.
How do you fix it when it does happen to you?
It is a physical piece. It is something that is being manufactured, and whether it is the coolest $1 million CNC machine, the tool that CNC machine is holding will degrade as it interacts with another material.
Right.
And if it is not changed on time, it will dimensionally be different from the one that went before it.
Yep.
Now, you can do all types of inspections to make sure that doesn't happen as much as possible, but it's going to happen. Now, some people are like, well, there are, vehicles, there are spaceships that nothing is imperfect. It has to be perfect to print.
Yeah, they
That's
made
why
one.
they cost $10 billion.
They made one of those.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, the price that the 1147 paid for the Hudson H9 is not the however much you're paying for a fighter jet. There is an economy of scale that we're enacting in order to do that, but it's the same thing with vehicles. There's some vehicles that have amazing quality and they really dial their stuff in, and there's some that are not. We have put a lot of effort into making sure that we're having quality parts on, but there will always be variability. It's how you control it and how you address it once you see it, and how much you test it within those different variables that actually helps you dial in your quality process.
I get a lot of comments from people who are like, that's an awesome old weird gun. Someone should make reproductions of it. And the theory, of course, is, well, you have one. Measure it and just make some more.
right.
Well, that's where this all comes into play there, because you have no idea the parts that you're taking out of that old gun. First off, they're all going to be worn for God knows how many decades of being used. And then, was that part at the high end of tolerance or the low end of tolerance when it was originally made? And if you're only going to make one, okay, fine. You can basically copy all the parts and hand fit it together and get one. But when people want reproduction guns, they want a production of them. And the only way that's ever feasible is economy of scale and production. And you need to have a complete technical package for the gun. You need to know not just the dimension, but what are the tolerances on that dimension? What's the material? What's the heat treat? This whole engineering study that goes through designing a firearm, which is what you guys have done. And people think that you can do that by picking up one old example. That it doesn't work that way.
A couple of things struck me with what you just said, too, and there is a difference between old world and new world manufacturing and machining. In the old world, skilled labor was relatively low cost
Right.
in comparison to today.
And materials were the expensive part.
Correct, and now it's flopped on that. And so now you try to do everything with machines to keep hands off the labor. And so this idea of making a part that back in 1880 or in 1910, that you could actually have someone sit there and file on it till it worked in gun 1247, isn't real now, but that was real then. So the way you design a gun today, based around modern manufacturing capabilities, is different than how you would have designed a gun in Browning's time. Fair statement?
Absolutely.
That's why really awesome quality 1911s are now $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 because someone's still sitting there doing that for something that was not designed for manufacture when it wasn't that costly to do. So
They're doing hand labor now, and the cost of that is what causes that gun to be that expensive.
That's why they don't bring back the Python. Sorry, they can't make the Python for less than like $5 or $6 grand.
We've mentioned this before. They tried to bring back the Luger.
Yeah, that was God. Actually, do you guys know about that
I
story?
did not know about that.
So Mauser wanted to reintroduce the Luger, and they thought they had this set because they discovered that there was a complete tooling setup and engineering package that the Swiss still had, because the Swiss were making Lugers into the 20s, and they figured, and it was still there, and they're like, aha, this is perfect. We'll buy it from the Swiss, and we can avoid all of exactly what we've been talking about. And the first thing that happened, first of all, like this had not been stored well. And so a lot of the QC gauges were rusty and not in good shape. It's like, ooh, okay. So
Calibration is
your
important.
fine precision measuring tools are now not working right. And then the way the Swiss machines had worked is that the tool was held rigidly and the work surface moved around it. And the way the German machines work.
We did not get your expression on camera, but as a modern designer, his eyes opened up like, oh my. Yes, yeah, exactly.
The German tools held the part stable and the tool moved around it.
Yes.
All of the tolerances were designed for this Swiss style of machine. And what they discovered is, we have to redo all of that.
Oh, wow.
And that's why you can't just go out and buy a 1970s production Luger made by Mauser, is because they made it work. They actually produced guns, but it was a financial disaster. And that's a gun where they actually had the technical package.
Yeah.
And a ton of experience having built them.
Still failed.
And it's still,
So let's talk about one where it's totally in spec and it's still not working.
yeah, exactly.
So that was, there have been a couple, but I have one that's pretty good.
Yeah.
It's all, you have to know what your suppliers are doing. So a breech face, you can broach it. You can broach it in machine. You can do it a traditional pull style or push style broach, or you can wire EDM it.
Multiple ways to get material out of there. You can hog it out and then do an insert sort of broach. You can do a more traditional style broach where you're broaching the whole thing.
So we're sitting there running guns on the line, and all of a sudden, 10 in a row aren't working. What is going on? Full stop. What are we doing? Engineer, we pull the engineer in. We're sitting there. We're all running guns. We're all sitting there looking at it, and it's just, why, why can't anything go right? Oh my, why can't it? And all of a sudden, smile comes on the engineer's face. Frustrated.
He disappears with it for a second.
Yeah, disappears, comes back, inserts a magazine, runs it flawless. He goes, recast layer. What?
Exactly what?
Wire EDM leaves a recast layer. They're not polishing the breech face. If they were broaching, that wouldn't be a thing.
So, yeah, we were having doesn't close up DCU situation there.
So like the slide doesn't go fully into battery?
Yeah.
Wouldn't go fully into battery,
Okay.
so it was a
DCU doesn't close up. Interesting. Okay. Yeah.
so an unnecessary amount of friction on the breech face was what accounted for that, and something that would naturally go away with the break-in period anyway, but we don't want that happening out of the box.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So just slight stone polish to take off the recast is what happens when they do the EDM. It actually puts the film right back on that breech face.
So EDM is electrical discharge machine.
Yes.
And it's
Really
basically
cool and weird.
Oh yeah, you
It's
can
old
make,
school too.
you make all sorts of crazy. You can do things with it that you cannot do with like a cutting tool.
Right.
It's funny though, because we've heard stuff from the audience in the past. Is like, I think it's ridiculous that I should buy a gun and it has in the manual wait 500 rounds until it'll be reliable for break-in period. And we see that it's happened with some of them, and that's exactly what you're trying to avoid is
Yes.
something like that in your manual. Yeah.
That's because back whenever other pistols were released, you couldn't find out in 2 minutes that someone else was having an issue with their gun across the entire world. So a lot of the things that would have required maybe that would be standard in the 80s, even a 50 to a 500 round break-in period, we just said no. We as a new company cannot afford to do that because people will think it's weird because other companies have had 10, 20, 40, or maybe 400 years to establish a brand and a way to address this customer service wise. No, we just tumbled slightly specified where we were going to get rid of our friction points, but we're going to still deal with it. We had guys do a custom Cerakote call us up, and they were just like, it's not closing up, and we said,
You've made the clearances tighter.
Yeah.
As a even just a Cerakote's enough to add a layer.
yeah, well, in ceramic media, if you don't cover that, and we were like, send it in, we have an idea, and we just went with a stone.
Surface
couple.
prep for Cerakote as well can tend to be aggressive, so if you're hitting that on the breech face as
Yeah,
well.
aluminum oxide blast if you accidentally get that in your breech face. So, but we just told them, hey, next time just mask this and it'll be fine. But a lot of those break-in periods that people were allowed in the past, it's really difficult for a firearm to come out now and not have people go, this doesn't work.
It wasn't that long ago. We had an experience like that with the Arsenal Strike 1.
Yeah.
He said, this requires a break-in period. You're like, what?
Yeah.
You don't expect that in a modern gun.
Yeah, you really don't.
Yeah.
The other thing is the internet means, as you just said, people have this instantaneous communication. It used to be, before the internet was around, a company could really kind of control what people knew about its product. Because you have the gun company, and then you have a very limited number of real advertising news sources, the gun magazines out there. And especially if you were advertising in them, they would be pretty willing to help you out. Case in point, the Colt All-American 2000, which got rave reviews out of the box, despite being a gigantic piece of garbage.
I still think it's neat.
It is neat.
It's
You
very
just
neat.
don't want to rely on one. But if you introduced a new pistol in the 80s and it had problems, you had the opportunity to go, oh crap, figure out the problem, figure out the solution, bring some of them back, maybe talk to a few magazine editors and go, okay, we figured this out, here's your new one. And when consumers had problems and wanted to return the guns, they didn't have any way to know, is this happening to every gun or did I just get a lemon? And a PR department or a customer service department would basically be able to tell everyone, oh, that's okay, you got a bad gun, we'll fix it. Today, that doesn't happen. That, something like an event like that occurs, and you go on the internet and you're like, wow, here's 30 other people who had the same problem. Obviously, this gun's a pile of junk. We'll never touch it again.
If we get a gun back, it is videoed upon receipt and open of box, and then it is videoed as it is put into a ransom rest and videoed real time, going back down the lane, checking, and then you get pictures of the accuracy test. If that was,
Wow.
we're going full bore to make sure that people know we're doing the right thing.
It's interesting you say that because we know other people in the industry, and someone I know very well, that same thing occurs to them. They'll get a complaint about a gun, they'll get it back into the shop, and he will take video of it without a cut, no cuts, of him firing it successfully or whatever, and then sending the video back showing that without these edits, there's evidence here that otherwise they would not believe that the problem was something else, like they were using garbage ammo or whatever was causing the problem, and they would put in quality ammo and they're like,
So
I don't know what to tell you. But he has to do it as this nonstop, unedited cut video to get to make the point.
Yeah, we have gotten, I think, 95% of the issues currently seen have been ammo related, and we tested
Reload?
reload
Okay.
for the majority, or they're getting just the bottom of the barrel. Now we tested with everything from Tula to Wolf, and the pistol can run it. If you run it for extended periods, it's going to make it dirtier, and that's going to happen.
It's a mechanical system.
I'm pretty cheap with ammo, and even I have decided to stop buying tool ammo.
You've been burned by the Tula in a couple matches now, and
Yeah.
when your scores on the clock hurt, you start to say, I don't know if I'm done
I'll
with this.
step up to Blazer Brass.
That said, you know what? Like Tula 5.56, we've had great success with.
Yeah.
Tula 9mm, not so much,
Yeah.
right? So,
Well,
yeah.
You're dealing with whether it's semi-spec or not. Is really the challenge there. But when 95% of your issues all have a commonality that it's reloaded ammo, our recommendation is quality factory loaded ammunition. That is going to have to be
Fixes most things.
It fixes most things.
Yeah. And you can't build a gun that will work reliably with ammo that is simply nowhere near spec. It's like buying a car and then complaining to the car company that I poured in some like kerosene with some sawdust floating in it, and the car doesn't work.
It's interesting you bring up the point of the internet, and I think that blade cuts both ways.
Oh, totally.
In that,
does.
a corrupt or malicious or just negligent company is found out. If they're putting out a bad product, and the ability of the community to aggregate that information in one place allows them to find out if something's wrong. But at the same time, it allows someone who, for example, you told us a story, actually complained about his gun not working, and it turned out he didn't even have one. And someone like that, who's just a malicious individual, can storm up a zeitgeist on the internet that is also wrong. And so you have to be very careful with your data sources.
Yeah.
If everyone's saying the gun doesn't work, that might be true. Not saying you in general,
Right.
but you got to vet all of this, and you have to be careful with just accepting it at face value.
Yeah, and I'll admit I'm very guilty of running into our customer service, demanding why we hadn't helped the customer out, yelling at them, and I had the crow later and say, I'm sorry, apparently this person never actually reached out or did anything they're claiming on the internet. So,
But you wouldn't have expected someone to complain about a gun not working that they didn't own. That seems like a very strange edge case.
we changed our policy to researching first before I
The point I bring this up is not to be apologetic, but the audience should hear that. I mean, that's a sad thing
happens,
that's how things work. So, and that's the term of the day, fake news, right? But it's stuff that's just thrown out on the internet is frequently accepted as honest truth just because you read it, because that's a human nature to do that. But the reality is, someone doing something like that can actually harm an honest company, and that's scary.
Now, on the positive side of things, all of this information accessibility also makes it very easy for a very small company to get a whole lot of publicity.
Yes.
That's true.
What would it have taken for you to get on the cover of American Rifleman, like you were on the cover of Recoil, I believe.
Yes.
Well, in the 80s, that's an expensive story to get access.
Yeah, you would have bought that.
There are gatekeepers,
Yeah.
and that just doesn't happen the way it can happen today if you create a product that's very interesting, that people are excited about, and they create the hype for you, and the media just kind of happens.
That's the blade cutting both ways.
Yeah.
It is, absolutely.
And the feedback from the customer service side, evaluating, lots and lots of positive. Not all of the constructive or the criticism has been negative. There's been a lot of constructive data points that I think they're surprising to get, and even more so when we positively engage backwards. I mean, talking about the H9 likes 147. It really, really likes 147 grain.
Yeah.
And, but having a conversation about that and what people are seeing with it, you're starting to get more and more data points about, oh yeah, when I tried this, and it validates some of the design aspects, and it coming from other than the manufacturer has helped a lot too, and
Yeah.
that spreads fast.
Well, that accelerates the process. If you made the Hudson H9 in 1881, you might get a letter back from the Frontier saying, "Hey, this thing shoots low." Just saying.
Yeah.
But now you can get it right over the internet like that. And
Oh.
if you get 5 people saying that, you go,
Maybe we
that's
should
weird. We've heard
investigate.
this from 5 people.
Oh, yeah.
And it allows you to improve your product very quickly.
It does.
Yeah.
It's been, like I said, double-edged sword as far as us getting the information, us being
the
able to
internet.
address the information, and I'm actually happy about it. And it also lights a fire under our butts because we did get a lot of encouragement. We got a lot of press through SHOT Show, which is just whirlwind. We hit the delay, but we haven't given up, and now people will show up at Industry Day and be like, well, what's next? If we had just said, oh, well, we're going to keep on working on the H9,
Yeah.
we don't do anything, yeah, that ain't going to work.
People expect the lightning to strike twice.
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
So
So
Hence you're drinking.
that's right. There we go.
so on that note, let's be very open about that. At SHOT Show, the hype train was huge. Choo choo, it was going full steam, right?
That's fun.
That's great,
It's got to be stressful.
but now you got to live up to the hype train.
Yeah.
Yes.
Has that been a problem?
As far as the pistol and how it's performed, no. And we'll drink to that.
How it's performing.
Well, congratulations to that. But I mean, psychologically, that must have been when the expectation gets as high as it does, that's got to be daunting.
No, you go.
One of the challenges that we really had when we hit the delay was how involved it forced us to have to be again in the getting manufacturing reset up back on the tracks to make sure that we were hitting production goals that we wanted to hit. And unfortunately, it meant having less of an interactive conversation. There were a lot of good questions coming out on where we wanted to go, and we wanted to be engaging daily. And Cy basically said, it doesn't matter if our goal was never to be vaporware. That was from day one. I do not want to be vaporware.
And there's a lot of those stories.
And, he basically said, social media blackout until we get it right, until we're ready to ship. People don't want to hear from us. And
Some people didn't act like it. Some people said they rather that we would have. However, it would have been a mind-numbing amount of, on honest, a self-assessment day, it would have been a woe is me, can we do this, are we fighting through? And I'm sorry, I didn't want to say that. I wanted to come back and say,
adapt and overcome.
got it, yes, we figured it out, here we go.
One of the things that you guys did right on that regard that would have, it may not seem like it, but like from the outside I can tell you, would have made it far easier is you did not accept pre-orders from people. You weren't holding anybody's money. You were holding, I'm sure, investors' money. And there are you're on the hook to make this thing work and based on this financial structure. But if you have a delay and people have already paid you for the gun,
Yes.
now you're eating a shit sandwich.
Actually, I'll put that out there. I've had people contact us, say they put in an order in January and where's their pistol, and we've had to address that multiple
Through the
times.
dealers or the distributors.
The dealers are doing
We
pre-orders.
do not have your money. We have never authorized that.
Lovely.
But what we said is that is up to you and your dealer.
Yeah.
We're not gigging on them either. We understand what they did. But yeah, so we've had to tell people we never receive money from distributors, dealers, or customers before we ship the pistol.
So we touched on this earlier, but let me paraphrase and you correct me where I'm wrong. You guys were at the point where you're like, going production here, and just as you're about ready to do that, in fact, getting ready to put out celebratory media, the wheels just come off because of a third party. And now you just stop. And
Full stop.
that is scary for you, but then the immediate storm starts in which everyone goes, oh, well, they're dead. That's what you hear on the internet, right?
Yep, and they did it. They pulled that stunt after we had told everybody, a week after we told everybody send all the parts. So they knew that our cash was already going out towards everybody else because we've had 99% of the parts. We need 100% of the parts to make the gun.
Yeah.
So
The full story of exactly what caused this delay, I'm sure, will come out at some point. But right now, it can't,
No.
basically for legal
But to talk
reasons.
about it in broad sweeping terms, which I think we can do. Business, we talked about this at one point earlier tonight, Sun Tzu, Art of War. Business is that. And there are people, even if you think they're your allies, will go, there's a moment here for me to get an advantage on this. And there sometimes are people that will use that. And,
Absolutely.
And when you're dependent on third parties, that could put your entire product or your livelihood on the line if they decide to play those shenanigans at the right time.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we saw here, I think, a little bit.
We saw an attempt, and that was actually a big deal. Pulled everybody in, and yeah, the thought passed for half a second. Well, what if we did it? And then we said, no,
You never pay the Dane Guild.
no, you're
Good
Yeah.
phrase. Yes.
Yeah.
yeah. There's no way it would have never worked out. That would have been the worst. Well, first off, you wouldn't have been in the habit for long because you're right. They would have kept on asking for more, but
We don't negotiate with terrorists.
damn right.
Yeah. Interesting use of that phrase. I wonder how many audience know that term.
We'll find out.
Yeah, that's interesting. But but it doesn't have to be malicious.
Right.
Like we know of other circumstances, not related to Hudson, in which ready to go, and then one critical component from a third party just, and you're done. Like at least until you can fix that, or source it from somewhere else, which is not necessarily an easy task. If you've been working with this person or this company to make this thing for how long? How do you redo all that again?
It can take 12 to 16 weeks to make a mold. Not all machines use the same type of mold, so it's not just about moving it to another one.
Tools, fixtures, all that. It's a development process, and not just from. You can get a prototype, a
Sure,
handful
right.
of them, knocked out. We've seen some stuff in 2.5 weeks for seriously critical
I
components.
can get you an H9 and ground up 2 weeks for around $15,000.
There you go. That's actually it in a nutshell. That is the trade-off of production volume versus production
I was
cost.
gonna say-
I'm sorry, at cost.
I was gonna say that's a deal. As CFO over here, that'd be a heck of a deal.
I'm sorry, no, that's at cost to us. We'll sell it to you for 30.
There's probably some whiz kid that could get you one ground up with a Dremel at home, but it's going to cost. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the point.
His time. How much
Yeah.
is his time worth?
And you have to fly over to Dara to get it.
Oh, and just think about
It's a
the
posh
stuff-
tune, and he's like,
They do some cool stuff.
You know you'll have arrived when you see
"That's
pictures
it.
on
That's
the
how you
internet
reduce your
of
costs.
Hudson.
You go over there, and you're like, stop making those Enfields. You got to make these H9s, right? Yeah. Looks all crude, but works. Yeah.
I love seeing some of the stuff those guys do. You want to talk about some cool creativity? You're like, yeah, I hadn't thought of that.
I think it was Vice. I don't remember. I watched some documentary. They showed them making ammunition, and you're just like, whoa! Like, seat the bullet. Primer's in there. They got a hammer. They're like, bam! You're like, yeah, I think I'm leaving now, right? I mean, but that's how they're doing it, and they make stuff that works.
Yeah, mostly works.
Mostly works,
Yeah.
but that's not what your target is. Mostly works.
80% of the time, every time.
80% of the time.
Not
it
even
works
from
every
a setup standpoint. I mean, think of just general process and human error. I mean, we had to fix a supplier issue, but we have a phenomenal team at the facility, and
Nice.
everybody rallied. Everybody got really, really tight and said, all right, well, we're not just going to sit here and wait for more parts. So we audited our own internal processes. Just things that from, theory to actual. We had some assembly fixtures that we had originally designed that when you actually get to a production environment, it's not exactly optimal, so, I mean, we've got people that understand lean manufacturing, and they say, you know what, we can
That's
do
cool.
better than this.
We've got
It's-
some spare time. What can we improve?
Absolutely.
I don't want to underestimate.
Sitting on
I don't want to underestimate our audience, but let's explain a few of those phrases.
Okay.
Yeah, actually, lean manufacturing. Tell us, what
Well-
is lean manufacturing?
Okay, so
Yeah, but-
first off, it's a buzzword.
Yeah.
That's the number
It
one
is,
thing
it's
you
a
learn
buzzword.
about lean manufacturing.
Six Sigma.
Yes,
yeah.
all of the belts. I
Yeah.
don't.
ISO 97. Yeah.
But it is important, and the intent is to take out waste.
So what does that mean? Explain. So, what is a lean manufacturing process?
Taking out unnecessary movements. Why am I going to put the next step in my assembly process at the other end of the facility and then bring it back over here?
All right.
Why would I, how you batch your parts? Is it more optimal to pre-batch certain assemblies together? Do you do sub-assemblies first? Do you do it or do you build a full H9 from start to finish out of certain components? Does it make more sense to, if you're doing lower volumes of production, build it from the ground up all at once in one single shot? Or, hey, if you have some spare time right now, should I build up a lot of sub-assemblies and be ready to rock and roll when the other parts come in?
So along the lines of an assembly line, let's say it's a car,
Yes.
and somehow you've done this extremely wrong, and you've made not lean manufacturing process, and so here you put on the wheel, but down there you put on the brakes. Oh, well, you take the wheel off, put the brakes on, and put the wheel back on, kind of stuff, and you're like, why don't we put the brakes on before we put on the wheel? I mean, that sort of a discussion.
You say car,
Yeah.
and actually the automotive industry is where we have a lot of inspiration. We have a wicked mad genius from the automotive industry, Barb, love you, that brought a lot of those principles to us to make sure that we're not trying to just do innovative on the firearm side of the house, but we're manufacturers too.
So you're saying your efforts here go straight back to Henry Ford?
You know what?
It
Honestly,
does come in black.
the thing I remember only
Kind of gray, but yeah, fair enough.
The
yeah.
thing I remember about Ford is he arranged to have some of his parts shipped to the factory in crates of a very specific size, because they'd unpack the parts and then they'd tear down the crates, and the wooden slats in the crates became the floorboard in the car.
I didn't know.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And now, in all fairness, and Barb, since we said your name, I'm going to mention the Toyota Way here. The lessons that you're getting from the Toyota Way and applied to a small startup, you have to be very creative, because you're not going to be able to do it pure. You're not going to be able to take your bar stock, put it in the machine, then go through the post-finish processing, then go to the coating, and then it all be one cellular structure, and then on-demand shipping. Now, Toyota, Yeah,
Right.
good on them, right?
A little more scale.
Yeah, we don't quite have the capital investment to do it completely right. But what processes can we enact right now in order to eliminate waste to where someone is not spending
That's
30
scalable.
minutes? Yeah, that's
right?
scalable. That's not spending 30 minutes on something that could take 3.
You know, it's interesting to listen to you guys talk because so much of what makes this gun actually happen is not gun design.
It's not.
It's manufacturing.
It almost seems like
process.
that's the least of it.
Yeah.
Like you start off with your PowerPoint and your paint, you're like, we want this thing.
Yeah.
But the amount of time you spent on that versus this it sounds like it's more this than it ever was the design process.
Design was way up front. We did not hire a single person until the proof of concept pistol. We pulled the trigger on the proof of concept pistol for the first time.
Like this?
No. I'm talking about just dry fire.
Oh, okay.
We pulled the trigger and we're like, it's there. And
That's the one that has the true H9 footprint. Yes, there were
okay.
certain changes.
We're not talking the earlier.
not the brick of the boat anchor, the proof of
the
concept.
weird trigger blade.
Got it. Yeah.
But so that was when we started hiring. We did have multiple manufacturing consultants from different industries that we were talking about lean manufacturing, but our big focus was finding the right people. Once we had an idea of who we were looking for to get this past where we knew, okay, cool, we got a cool design, that's great. Now let's find really, really, really smart people.
We have a lot of people in the audience that write to both you and I about, I'm a burgeoning firearms, hope to be a firearms designer. And when you look at, for example, you mentioned the prototype, but let's go back to the brick and the boat anchor, which, by the way, you're going to have a video on Forgotten
Yes.
Weapons about.
I don't know if it'll be up when this posts, but Forgotten Weapons will have a video on the origins of the H9.
We'll try to cross-link on that. But regardless of that, your original ones were, crude's a fair term. How did you do those? How did you make those crude efforts? Like, what did you do? Like the guy that wants to make his first thingy that's this.
I have this great idea.
How did you do that? Was that at home with the Dremel? I mean, how did those first prototypes come about? Within reason.
Went to Beretta's website, found a posting for a mechanical design engineer.
Because we needed the right language for who
Copied.
could have the
right,
mechanical
so-
aptitude for.
So you snarfed their job description.
Copied and pasted into guru.com, which was a site for
Freelancers.
freelancers.
It's like Fiverr. I need a gun engineer.
Yeah, well, we found a couple that had similar qualifications. We interviewed a couple of them, and we ended up with Gene Kane. If you're out there, hope to get you your H9 soon. And we started the process back and forth. And what we were doing is we were paying that with our deployment money, and it was
So
basically
you hired an engineer with just raw cash.
with our deployment money, and then he helped us find machinists that he knew.
So those early prototypes, the brick and the boat anchor, were made by a machinist?
So different iterations of engineers between those, but we would actually leverage local shops if we could, because a lot of those design engineers had at least translated something to a prototype, so they knew a shop that they could go to, and we would leverage local shops that would deal with prototype work.
That seems particularly sticky with a firearm. Like, if I wanted to make, I had an idea for a cool action figure, let's say, and I drew a picture of an action figure. You could find an engineer to figure out how to make a 3D model of it and go to a place and go, I want you to make me this action figure. It's not a gun. So how do you get someone to work with you to make a fireable firearm? That's
Gotta find an FFL for that part.
right,
Yes,
sure.
The brick, actually, so that'll be something we talk about in Forgotten Weapons, is a lot of 3D printed parts, which that was part of our ignorance and excitement for the technology at the time, and they had just done the...
Talk about friction. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, but they had just done the 3D printed 1911. It was so
Yeah.
exciting at the time. And they had an FFL. So then we moved to the boat anchor, and the FFL, we found someone who could make the part. It really wasn't too difficult.
We
At the
hadn't
time,
moved to
because
the chassis at that point in time, so we had kept a lot of the
traditional profiles.
traditional profiles. So
And and when you're paying $2, $3, $5,000 per part, you're going to find a lot of people who would take your
Wow.
business.
So this is the kind of overhead you're looking at. If you're an individual and you've got a design for this cool thing, you're looking at a lot of money here.
a lot of money.
Just for a prototype that frankly is kind of an ugly thing at the end of the day.
Paying custom, one-off, you're paying machine time,
Yeah.
plus someone who's got the expertise to actually translate a drawing into a
And
real part.
because it's supposed to be a one-off, you do cut it a little bit, but then you dial it in and you go very, very slow so you don't mess it up the first time, and you're paying all that time and
Right.
that slow time
But
on that machine instead
you
of
can't
production.
grow
time.
material back, so
Right.
keeping it material safe is always
Right, that's still cheaper than
Yes.
making a second one because you did the first
So
one. in a
you're
rush.
paying an engineer out of your own money to do some diagrams or let's say a CNC program.
yes.
And then that's getting brought to a machinist who's then running that. And they're running it on a slow cycle, so there's not an error in the process. And you're paying for per minute of machine time for a part to come out the bottom.
Plus labor and then profit.
Yeah.
So programming the machines, it's not just a drag and drop like of the CAD stuff where you can put it in there and it cranks it out.
No, yeah.
I programmed CNC machines.
Oh,
That's
my
right.
goodness. Well, that was a learning curve for us because
Hmm.
I've actually seen the things show you how they do a little cutter path. It's not a nice little drag and drop. It's hours and hours of programming. And
Yes.
sometimes custom fixtures have to be designed so they can get that little drill bit in there just like so.
Yep.
This is a recurring theme I've heard as well, and that it's very hard to find good CNC operators. Like there are out there, but
It's easy to get a guy who can run the machine, like take the part out, put the new material in, hit the start button. Finding someone who can program an efficient cutter path. And
They're artists.
Yeah.
I'll say it this way: it's hard as a startup to compete with the larger
Mm-hmm.
manufacturing companies in this country.
big money.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The good
Why-
guys are hired by.
Why would I take some of your pay when I can go work for Big Blue and get way more, right? Or whoever, some
Reliable.
company,
Yeah,
yeah.
whatever company, like a lot of aerospace, they have a lot more cash than a small firearm
So you
startup.
kind of have to find a guy that's willing to take whatever you can pay, and maybe they're energetic about the project, right? There's that possibility.
There is no replacement for belief in what you're doing.
Like you get the guy that nerds out and was like, "Oh, this is cool. That's different." Now he's getting paid intellectually as well as financially, which is something different.
Zero replacement for that.
When it gets to a production environment too, always looking for efficiencies, all of a sudden it's this particular tool might cost several dollars more, a consumable tool, but because it's got a specialty coating and they try it and they experiment with it, that it'll make you, twice the number of
Right.
parts. So
It almost sounds demoralizing, but what I'm hearing is if you're a burgeoning firearms aficionado and or designer, the answer is have lots of money.
Find
Like, I mean-
or find.
If you can find a financial partner.
Or someone that knows how to do this
That's-
that can, or get venture, or, you know.
It's interesting. I have actually been involved in a project where there was a prototype gun made and it worked fantastically. Thing ran perfectly, but it was a one-off handmade gun. And trying to translate that into a production gun, even a small-scale production gun, like basically they tried to rebuild this thing in the way the first one was made and almost had to start completely from scratch. Virtually every single part. They're like, we made 50 of the hammers and 30 of them don't work. 30 of the trigger groups don't work because the first one wasn't done with a technical package. It was, this is about the right shape of a hammer, and then cut and file and test and file and test and file. And you end up with a gorgeous gun, but it's not one that can be reproduced.
There's another way. You can copy. You can build something with very loose tolerances. You can make something that's simple. Your challenge then
High point.
it's gonna be very difficult to get people excited
Yeah.
at that point. The challenge you're gonna run into actually let's talk about it this way. You just said you gotta find money or you gotta have money. Okay, if that's the challenge, how do you do that? There's multiple ways.
banking relationships are really, really hard for the firearms industry.
Right.
You can have
Oh, yeah.
And I know that's a kind of charged topic, but it's, you have to do your research on what is and what is not available and who you tie your funds up with. when him and I started as a garage FFL before we were actually doing any design work, it was something that was coming out in the news about just credit cards.
Banks are just
and
freezing the
funds.
accounts of
Yeah.
gun-related companies. Yeah.
So, that's always something that we asked a lot of questions on the front end. And I mean, anything from just, I guess, traditional financial products up front. If you have any issue with working with a firearms company, it's personal.
Let's find
but
out now, yeah.
yeah, find out now. It's not a good fit.
Yeah.
Don't find out the hard way.
That's an interesting point. So, I mean, so you go to a venture capitalist or an angel investor and you're like, hey, I got this cool software that makes cat emojis. They might put some money in the pot. You go to the same angel investor and you're like, I want to make a new gun. And they scatter like cockroaches, that many of them probably are. But because gun. Yeah.
Or manufacturing.
Oh, really? Just that alone?
It's a large scale startup, and at the time when we started, we did not have the people with us, the education base, the knowledge base, any of that to propose, let's bring all the machines in house.
And these type of investors are generally now used in a technical environment to dealing with something that's not a physical object. They're dealing with software developers, coders, things that have ideas, but they're not making physical things.
Yep.
So there's the startup cost to a coder is go get a coder, right? The startup cost to make this is an entirely different
Let's
endeavor.
spend $200,000 on a machine.
Yeah.
Let's talk about, well, let's say you're starting a bag company. Cool backpacks, like for, guys who are tactical or whatever.
Yeah, sure.
You can find materials and stuff.
Do you
and,
need a physical location, drop shipping, FFL, compliance, ITAR, all
Do you
that?
just-
You don't need any of that. In fact, you can go over and have it sewed up in Vietnam. You're not going to do that with your H9.
You can't.
Right, right.
Yeah.
That's my point.
But you go and get your education. You go overseas in China and see all the stuff that they can do. You can get an education really quick from a couple of trade shows, but then of course they're awesome companies. And I'm not denigrating bad companies. I'm kind of a nerd about those sometimes too. But what you'd have to do is market well, and you have to choose quality materials and make sure that you continue to have quality materials in craftsmanship and workmanship. But you could do it overseas at a low upfront cost, and then you're just about promoting your brand and brand awareness. The infrastructure investment let's say if we wanted to build 100% from the ground up the H9 at a quantity of let's go a low number of 1,000 a month. How much you think in your mind capital investment we need to have the number of machines and set up to do it all from the ground up?
Everything.
Everything.
So I get spring machines.
You get spring machines
and a heat treating facility.
and a heat treating facility.
Ooh, and shot painting,
Yeah.
specialty coatings.
Nitriding, right? All that.
Oh, okay, specialty coatings. So I need tanks and hazmat stuff. I need to be properly zoned for all that additional
You've
stuff.
got to pay
too.
off the local EPA guy.
Well, if we were doing our own tritium vials.
Oh goodness, so
geez.
radioactive. Yeah, exciting.
Wow, this is a good point.
So, we've really tried to make sure that the people that are currently masters of a specific process that we would not necessarily bring in-house, just one spring machine would be really cool.
You just want a spring machine.
She really likes spring machines. You brought it up a couple times.
They're
Yeah.
really cool.
But, that's not even the bulk of the visible stuff that you see on the H9. We're talking about all of the stuff that is extra to that, identifying people that are capable, identifying the subject matter expertise that would be required to bring that in-house. I'm not allowed to touch an oven that gets as hot as what heat treats our stuff. Fire.
I'm really curious what just some order of magnitude ballpark estimate. What would that cost? If you want to make 1,000 pistols a month in your own fenced off domain.
I could think of what actual machines for the machine components would be. We have forgings though, and then all the
Forging
stuff
machines are cheap, I'm sure. Forging dies can't be that expensive.
melting down that kind of material. I have no concept of the stuff that it would take to do outside of the machining side of the house right now.
the order of magnitude, and then the level of expertise that would take into that. And then you talk about your stamping for your magazines.
Oh god, there's
Yeah,
another
You know,
one.
this is what you're talking
Oh,
about.
and now you're dealing polymers too.
Yeah, you're talking about setting up a plant like the classic, like Mauser, just empire.
Yeah.
They had acres and acres and
It would-
acres of, Mauser had its own power plant on site to power all of its machines.
That's the
because they
military
did all of this
industrial
stuff.
complex, though, which
Yeah.
is not an individual company.
No, but that's what's required to do it in-house.
Yeah.
To do it as a scratch
To do
kitchen where you make it
everything.
all,
Yeah.
it's not really real.
Yeah,
It's
I
not
was
viable.
about to say start trying to add up the numbers, and I get to a point where I'm just like,
You know,
okay.
this really sheds light on why it was so prevalent 100 years ago for an inventor. You never saw like Merwin decide to make his own revolvers in house. He took it to a company, an existing company that had all of this huge infrastructure. Why Winchester and Colt had these patents come to them or bought patents, because investor 100 years ago, without access to things like the internet and easy international trade, just flat out couldn't do it. You'd partner with someone who had already had the success to build up this huge empire of manufacturing capability. I mean, you look at the Patterson revolver. That thing crashed and burned. They had to outsource all of the machinery to that, and when it failed, it just...
Yeah.
Or just go back to American World War II, where like, wow, we need more of these things. Who did they go to? Other people that were already doing manufacturing type things, even
Right.
if they weren't guns.
Right.
Because they had the machines.
Rockola M1 carbines.
Yeah,
exactly.
The jukebox company. That is so cool.
Yeah, the grease gun,
Yeah.
made by GM's guide lamp division, because they knew how to stamp sheet metal.
But these are pre-existing industries. Even though they're not making guns, you're still leveraging that investment in machining and capabilities to do it.
Yep. In fact, one of the reasons I'm going way off topic. One of the reasons the Germans were able to make such elaborate stamped firearms during World War II is German industry had experience with this, making basically cheap toys.
Yeah, they made stamped toys. You can find these old German toys that are stamped sheet metal.
You know what?
Yeah.
Russian industry didn't make those things. Look at how
They gave you splinters to play with.
yeah. Look at how difficult it was for the Russians to get the AK working as a stamped gun. It took them like 12 years with the help of Germans,
Yeah.
because they just didn't have that industrial
It's
expertise.
funny though that it comes down to something as simple as we made these little stamped sheet metal toys for kids, suddenly turns into the Sturmgewehr. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, that
Yeah.
pre-existing knowledge and equipment had to be there.
Yeah.
So the other way to think about this is now you guys are targeting to make a gun that's going to be a production gun that's going to be at some point, I'm sure in your hopes and dreams, on the shelf at Sportsman's Warehouse or whatever. I mean, that's where you're going.
Yep.
There are niche guys, things like SMG guns, who have no goal of having an FG42 on a shelf at Sportsman's Warehouse.
Right.
And as a result, Rick, who's a great guy, does a lot of that machining in-house, but he's still dependent on third parties broadly. But the other way to do it is you make a very small number of guns with as much of the machining in-house at a very high labor. The labor costs are only high because he's doing them, but how many guns does he make?
Hundreds, not tens of thousands.
Hundreds, literally. And that's why his guns are $5,000 a piece.
And a steal at that price.
And they are. The fact that he sells them at that price is almost hard to comprehend.
Absolutely.
And make $1 doing it. And people don't understand that. But the reason is because he can't depend on all of this industry to make those guns.
Right.
And the only reason he can do it is because there's enough of desire for that weirdo thing that there's a small subset of collectors that are willing to pay that to get that cool thing. Not so much with a brand new pistol. Like that's a different problem.
It's the order of magnitude in how we approached it and what we're dealing with is very, very interesting and complex. And there were very few startup entrepreneurial books that you can find that address this particular question. That most of them would be like, well, why can't you pick something a little bit easier? Why not start 20 passive income websites? Why not start 100 of one of those? I bet you it'd take you less time. One for Chihuahuas, one for Australian Shepherds, one dogs are always popular.
You talked earlier, we were chatting off camera, and you said something about like Google searches for how to build gun business.
Yeah. That won't get you too far.
Not a lot of hits on that query.
There's no dummy's guide for that.
So
Well, you could write one now. There's your backup income source.
yeah. Let's get a year or two down the road. Then we'll have that discussion. I don't know. We've got. I think we've still got a lot to do, and I think we're still looking forward to doing it. We have a lot to do before this becomes an established brand and not just a one-off cool thing at SHOT Show that 1 year. I believe that the trigger mechanism, the platform itself, the recoil characteristics, we can grow, and then our patent protection on those, we can grow our company off of that. But we've got a lot of work to do before then. And just for anyone, we are hiring. We will start putting that out on social, and we're about to grow and scale again. So we're about to actually advertise that again.
Okay.
So we're pretty excited.
So if that's the question, how do I get into a career in gun design? Well, there's one answer for
That's
that.
another answer. Another company, you work for another company. Maybe you're not the one starting the company, but you'll end up working for a company. That's another way to do it too.
Yeah, and if he ends up watching this, there's a college student reached out and said, "Can we do an interview about, can I do an interview about how to get in and become a firearm designer?" I'll say it straight up is you just research. We started with researching first. And I know
We
told both of
continue
y'all
with researching.
started with Forgotten Weapons, and then we went to a lot of the blogs and a lot of stuff that you'd probably find more on InRange, which would be what do modern people expect from firearms. You cannot forget the past, but you have to address what people are doing now and how weapons are being utilized, or you're not gonna hit any of it. But
Or what was, always put it in context, what was the reality of manufacturing at the time that something was built? There's so much about that, whether it's, 40 years old or 200 years old. It's, why was it done this way? It's not just because it's older, it's cooler,
It's not random.
right?
It's never random.
and always hate your own design until you can't anymore. But if you
That's an interesting way to put it.
if you love the first thing you do,
It's wrong.
It's wrong.
That's
Yeah.
rough. You've gotta find an opinion. It doesn't matter if it's an internet troll. It doesn't, but someone who will hate what you're doing. Find, and you've got to figure.
Tell me the baby's ugly.
Yeah, your baby. You need to say that your baby's ugly so many times. Always start from assuming that you're wrong, and then iterate that until your argument or your design is so good that you can't make the argument anymore.
You don't want to hire combative people, but you do want to hire people that are willing to give you a dissenting opinion.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
You don't want that person to always give a dissenting opinion. Then they just
No, that's a combative. But you want someone that's willing to sit there and go, no, and here's why.
They have to stand up to the boss and go, no, really, this needs to be better.
But it takes a wise boss to be able to accept that.
Yeah,
Because
that's
that's
true.
hard.
That said, there's a
Well-
stopping point, especially if it's a business related matter. And one
Oh,
thing that
fair.
I will say about engineers, you can
They will iterate till you
refine
die.
and refine and refine, and you know how you can always divide by something and it'll just get smaller and smaller and smaller.
You need a Georg Luger and not a Hugo Borchardt.
Or another example historically, because we love to bring that into you. You mentioned about you being in love with your first design, the Henry rifle. He decided the Henry rifle, when he brought out the 1860 Henry with its magazine feeding system, it was perfect. It needed to be never fixed again. It was ready to go and done. And then Winchester and the King's Cape patent, where you could load it from the receiver, it's like, stupid. The Henry's perfect. Well, guess what succeeded? The Winchester, because the loading system on the Henry sucked, right? But he was not willing to accept it. It was perfect out of the box. Well, it wasn't perfect out of the box, and Winchester essentially made the rifle better and took away what could have been his, because he wasn't willing to be tolerant enough of it's not perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's many examples, like Borchardt's another
Yeah,
one.
exactly.
Yeah, well, you said that, but but that's another one.
That's he wouldn't give up that big crazy lease.
It was fine. It was good to go. You don't need that.
It's funny, Luger was never really much of a firearms inventor, but when it came to giving him a design and getting it optimized, that's where he shined.
He just got it out the door.
And he made it fantastic.
He was Apple. Apple gets accused for a lot, but they don't make a lot of new stuff. What they do is take someone else's idea and go, and they tweak on it. So that's what Luger did with the Borchardt. But anyways, this is a fascinating insight into
Yes.
what honestly sounds like a very daunting and scary endeavor. To be able to be, this is why when we first met you, I was wow, this is incredibly impressive, because I don't know that I would have the wherewithal to be like, here's everything I own, plunk. Let's see what happens. Spin it on red. That's kind of what you did.
Nice.
That's black.
Well, you spin it on black. But that's what you had you had the faith there to do that. But you were spinning on black.
And if you're gonna take on something like this, I highly recommend taking up bourbon or something similar that helps you through that.
And this is why we don't see a lot of startup firearms companies, and we see the same couple making the same stuff over and over.
That's why there is a lot of vaporware. There are a lot of people who come up with one really nice handmade prototype and just can never quite. In some ways, this actually reminds me of like trying to get a job, where you send out resumes and you send out resumes and you send out resumes, and the first time you get a call back from someone, you're like, awesome, it's done. And by the time you get to the end of this process, you realize, no, it's like the 10th interview I do is where you actually get the job. And early on, what looks like success is, only the very beginning of the process. You know what? When you've got the design in hand, in some ways, that's when the actual work starts.
Drawing review.
Another man, I know we're winding down here, but another way to look at this is that there is very large companies that a number of them have made failed guns in recent history.
Crash and burn failed.
Embarrassingly bad. And that's a company that has way more resources than what you did.
They have it all in-house.
And so whether or not we find out that there may be something that you don't know about in the Hudson that you have to fix at some point, it's possible. Let's expect that as a reality. These big companies put out a gun that, oh my God, didn't work out of the box at all. Like, the first one's bad. Like, that's not what you're dealing with, is my point.
Right.
But it goes to show that even a company with huge resources can make those mistakes.
Yeah.
It has more to do with your team and its attention to detail, the amount of support you give them or the amount of support they give you. It can go both ways, or the amount of crap they give you or the amount of crap you give them about their work. Being a highly judgmental or critical person has not been a negative within our company culture.
We're all auditors of our own process there, and I think really the awareness of how many variables there are, be it suppliers. We talked before about a more malicious sort of scenario, but
Could be just an honest mistake, too.
if something comes in, an off-the-shelf component, and you're sent it in the wrong material, we're talking
Slip fit pin.
easiest situation is you find it, but it's a delay. So we talked about the delays there. So that prevents a sub-assembly from happening because it never gets to inspection. You return it to a supplier, they send you a new one, you go get it coated, it goes through inspection, it gets assembled.
One roll pin is all it takes to derail the thing.
Absolutely.
What you said, though, was the culture, I think, is the point, because being a veteran of corporate world, unfortunately, for some of us, I've been there, I think that what you're seeing in some of those big companies and some of their failures is that they've probably engendered a culture of you're not allowed to do that. Like, you probably can't say there's a problem here or you're in jeopardy. And there's probably an engineer at one of those big companies right now literally going, I said this in 18 meetings, but it was irrelevant. Like, that was not going to happen, right? Because that's how some of these places work. I'm not saying which one even. I'm just saying big companies get that way.
Yeah.
And I bet you there's a lot of that.
No throwing stones. Here, I wish everybody on their endeavor in building a new
Oh,
farm
no. I'm just saying that large organizations tend to get a culture.
Oh, no,
like that.
I said that to say I can imagine the amount of bureaucracy whenever you get to where the ship you are guiding is $1 billion and you are answerable not to just yourself or you're answerable to a public and a bunch of people who are expecting the profits, or they will pull the rug out from under your feet.
Yeah.
And
we're in a different environment, but we absolutely do. I mean, our assembly team, we encourage. Something looks weird, ask. Or our
looks weird as weird.
Our assembly team, they were there through us having our delay. They had a lot of time to look at stuff, and they very much translated from the pre-production environment to a now production environment.
Nice.
And work instructions. You have work instructions in the pre-production environment. If there's a remnant in there that is old,
Right.
do you know why you're doing every aspect of the assembly the way you do? If it doesn't translate anymore, why? Process improvement.
During the downtime, whenever we were practicing, were you practicing with non-expensive fake thread sealant? Well, did you change over when we went to?
Yeah.
But, it's funny you say that, though. We're here in 2017, nearly 2018, and we're back to the old world manufacturing. And so what you're saying is a lot of the success still comes back to skilled, caring workers.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's the same thing again.
Absolutely.
That does not go away, no matter what your manufacturing capabilities are.
It
Our
doesn't-
team gets excited about watching the reviews. They'll come back in. Did you guys see this one?
I built that
That's
one,
awesome.
or whatever. I
Yes.
might have built that one, or I did build that one.
That's
right?
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they also get to watch if there's anything negative said. Customer service briefs them on the positive and the negative. You want to talk about if there's something negative, they all go back and you kind of pull back. You let them fight it
They
out
don't
for a
talk
while.
much for the rest of the day.
If something
there's-
goes wrong.
Oh,
if there's something up,
That's-
it's,
That's awesome.
it is.
Yeah.
That's awesome. If we can continue to create a culture of caring about putting out a quality product and we can scale that, which is the goal, which is what we're working on this next year, the sky's the limit. If we
Yeah.
can get quality people doing quality work, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pride of workmanship. I know
It matters.
we both know a guy that works at U of A, and he got to see his handicraft, his workmanship on Mars. So he watched the TV and goes, I built that part. But the same thing you're talking about, saying,
Yeah.
I built those guns.
Mhm.
That's an interesting, that's a rewarding thing for those people.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For you too.
I
as
had a
designers, but
moment like that. It was really, really neat. I had walked into an academy one day and was walking by the gun counter because I go by the gun counter everywhere. And I overheard the guy behind the counter talking to a couple, and it sounded like they were buying their first gun, or at least her first gun.
Sure.
And he was talking to her about the features of several of the things that were in the gun counter, and he said, and yeah, the Hudson, this new company came out with something at SHOT Show. It's really, really cool, and it was just one of those kind of out-of-body experience
Yeah.
moments where I was like, oh my gosh, that's so neat.
Holy shit, that's awesome. That is really cool.
So-
That's awesome.
And that was pre-production too. It was just after
Wow.
SHOT Show when Buzz was starting, so it was kind of neat.
Nice.
Yeah.
It was really neat.
Anything else you want to bring to the audience while we're closing up?
Don't mean to sound discouraging if we're talking about, if you're really looking to get into it, there's always a way. There, as long as you're willing to stick it out.
Understand what you're going in with both eyes open.
Yes, and finding money. Do your research, business plans, and there are so many different books saying business plans are overrated, and that's something that was done in the 80s or before, and they're not really needed in this new, awesome, cool. Well, it forces you to do your research, it forces you to write it down, and it forces you to question it.
Be conservative about your timeline expectations, not just
Oh.
not because you won't meet them, and it doesn't mean double it and sit there and wait for it to take twice as long, but always be aggressive on them, but be cautiously aggressive because there's a ton to learn.
Okay, I'm going to sound corny here.
Yeah.
Pair yourself with someone who has the strengths where you're weak. I hate.
He's
being
impatient.
I
He's so
hate being
impatient.
conservative with it. I hate it. I don't want to do it. I want us to all tackle it. I want us to put our lives on hold. I want now done. Let's get there, and then you're conservative. You're risk averse, but not in a negative way. In a practical way. In a pragmatic way that saved our asses quite a few times. So if you can find that. That would be actually there. You go. That's the
It's
first
about your
step.
team.
Yeah.
It really is about your team.
Yeah.
So put yourself with people that challenge it from multiple angles. Best program you'll get.
Yeah. There you go. That's the best way to do it.
All right. Well, awesome. Thank you guys very much for taking the time to chat with us.
Thank
I'm
you,
humbled to
guys.
have you here to do this
Absolutely.
with us.
Yeah.
It's a really awesome experience and opportunity to be able to bring this to InRange, and I appreciate it.
Well, hopefully you guys appreciated and enjoyed watching or listening to this because, of course, if you are a patron subscriber to InRange, you have the option to get content like this as an audio podcast as well. So there are a number of other cool perks. If you're interested in helping to support the channel, we are an entirely viewer or listener supported channel. So check us out on patreon.com. And thank you very much for watching.
Thanks.